It is now 6:30 PM on March 14th, and we wish to call the meeting of the Burnsville Economic Development Commission to order. And the first item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. And I trust everybody had a chance to look at it. And we will stand for a motion to approve.
So moved.
So moved by Craig, seconded by Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving along, the adoption of the minutes is next. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved. Any changes recommended? No. Seconded? By Ari, okay. On a motion by Jean Grazzini, seconded by Ari
Silky.
Silky.
There you go.
Got a mental block there. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. Next on our agenda is a open forum for business persons to come forth and speak to this group. And I'll just make that comment. I see none here other than our next presenters. So we did the open forum, and we'll move along to the next item on the agenda. Peggy, welcome, and Mr. Tucker, welcome. And you have the floor.
I'm going to hand out, what Peggy is going to talk to start this, I'm going to hand out these, because there's a couple of slides in here that are not on the PowerPoint that you have.
Thank you.
Well, Richard and I are here this evening to talk
Thank you.
about a project that we've been working on for the past year plus or so, been active in the community a little longer than that. A model that 360 Communities brought forward to the community as an opportunity to further community growth and engagement. And this is not a 360 project, but they were wonderful in bringing ideas forth and then engaging a number of different community partners to come together in sort of a very unique approach to engaging our community and moving us all forward. So you may have heard the name My Burnsville. That's the name of the project, has been given, and we've made some exciting progress. Richard and I are focusing on a particular part of the project, and that's why we're here to talk about that tonight, but we want to just give you a little bit of background so you know how that fits into the bigger picture of the whole My Burnsville project. So just a little bit of background. A whole group of community leaders came together to do some planning and prioritizing to look at ways that we can improve the community of Burnsville. And through that process of discussions and planning, 4 themes emerged in 3 different areas. So that you know what those are. The first is to develop community capacity to promote and encourage literacy, and that is focused specifically on pre-K, very young kids before they enter school. We're not going to talk in detail about that project tonight, but you should just know that this group is doing some really terrific work, and they've created some pretty unique partnerships within the community. So you can look forward to hearing more about what they're doing, but they're doing some great work. Second point is to engage the community in conversations around expectations for education and to build consensus. So we have some really terrific things to brag about in Burnsville and our Burnsville School District. Sometimes we don't brag enough about the great things that are going on. For instance, you probably know that we certainly lead the way in college-level courses that are offered, and we're very proud of that. But there are lots of things that we could brag about. And so the idea that it's important, the image of your school district to the community, so something that they felt was definitely worth focusing on. So they're doing some good work in that area. Third was to foster civic engagement and to support the other planning teams as part of this process. So really get people connected with Burnsville and get them to really identify with this community where they live. So fourth is the area that Richard and I have been focusing on, nurturing innovative community partnerships, supporting a competitive business climate. So really focusing on the economy and workforce in Burnsville. Richard and I were approached to co-chair this group and lead this effort. My job is Community Relations Director for Dakota Electric Association, which puts me out in the community every day in my job. Richard runs the Coldwell Banker office here in Burnsville, which means he's tremendously knowledgeable about the city of Burnsville and great asset to this effort. So he's been a great partner. So we began our process looking at 3 priorities that were set forth by our group. The first being community marketing and branding, and that's where we've spent the most time to date. How could we effectively market the community of Burnsville, and how could we brand it to help us in that effort? We were very fortunate in that the city of Burnsville had done a lot of groundwork in the idea of branding, and you may be familiar with some of the work they did a few years back, so that was a great jumping off point for us to use. And Skip, very, very helpful in that process and getting us up to speed and what had already been done. And taking that information, we built on that, and Richard's going to talk in a little more detail about how that process has rolled out. Our second objective is attracting and retaining business. So that's what Skip does every day, day in and day out. And you should know that he's been tremendously helpful to us in this effort, brought us a lot of good information, really worked in partnership with us, so we've appreciated that very much. So we're looking at ways that our community and specifically our business partners can step up and help Skip in those specific efforts. And we have not done a lot of work, really only groundwork on this particular area. Third area, increase income among residents. Could there be a broader statement? But that's okay, because it's the third point that we are working towards. There have been some really terrific ideas put forth that could specifically help individual households to raise their household income. It also is a little later in the timeline. Really, you'll see that it's a culmination of the efforts of the different groups, and really will connect the dots when we get to that point. So not a lot of work has been done, but it's certainly a goal that we're working towards. Those last 2 points that we've not done a lot of work on, we're very happy to be here tonight talking to you so that you know what we're working on. We're going to look to partner more closely with you as we move forward on, especially on the second 2. So, laying out our efforts in this area, focusing on economy and workforce, we came up with some boundary statements to keep us focused on what we're trying to do. So just quickly to give you a feel for that, to make sure that it's innovative, that we're not doing things that are already being done. And we wanted to specifically tap into the business community. There are business folks that we think that have not been tapped, that we could really engage and really raise our efforts in this area. So create volunteer opportunities. How can, again, the engagement piece, how can really we engage new volunteers and specifically businesses? We want it to be something that we're known for. And we did not want to create another entity. So this is not, you should know, this is not moving towards creating a new organization or a new name. We named the effort My Burnsville, but this is not creating a new organization. It's really a collaboration of a number of different organizations across the community. I think that's very important to know. We're not headed in that direction. We wanted to make sure that it can be sustained. Lots of hoopla when you get a new effort started. We want to make sure that this moves forward in the future. We wanted to make sure that it's simple enough so that specifically our businesses can get behind these efforts, so that it's not a complicated or convoluted process. We want businesses to plug in so that we can use their expertise and their support in this effort. So in order to do that, I think we felt we need to keep it simple. And then fostering community ownership by engaging a wide range of stakeholders in the process. And so we've worked very hard to pull from the community a number of different folks that represent different stakeholders in the community, and I think we've been very successful in that effort. And then just again, leveraging existing programs and organizations, so not a new program, but let's utilize to the best we can things that are in place, and then let's be innovative as we move forward to create things that fill the needs that we've identified. So I'm going to go ahead and
Okay.
have Richard follow up a little bit.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. One, I think the first thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we have a plan. And I think 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 that we So what we started with was looking at some of the work that the city had already done in regards to branding. And there was an effort that had been undertaken, and a lot of research had been done to understand what that should look like. And so we took that as our base to start working with. And then we convened a group of stakeholders, people who we felt really had a vested interest in this whole project. Looked at the city, because the city had been part of that original leadership team for all 4 of those themes. And so part of that, we looked at Skip, for example, was part of the city representation, the chamber, local businesses, the Visitors Bureau, real estate, a number of other people. And so what we wanted to try to do was understand, who are we trying to target this branding effort towards? When you start and look at it from a business perspective, you kind of decide, who's my target audience? What is it that I want to try to convey to them? What's my product that I'm selling? Well, what we're looking at is it's the community of Burnsville. And so we want to understand, who's our target audience for economic development within that. And so we worked with a local company, Casina Marketing and Branding, who does a very nice job and really worked us through a whole playbook of trying to understand who this targeted audience ought to be. And in fact, we got to the point where we named them. We actually had 3 separate groups, but for example, one of them, Mike and Kim, and that was really based on some research in terms of right down to the level of average or typical names for people who fit this profile. But what we're looking for is business owners, small to mid-sized businesses that have the ability to make the decision to move or grow their business in a particular community. We're not looking at the next Ford plant, but we're looking at realistic opportunities for people who can locate a business here and grow that. And we really, through this playbook, we generated a tremendous amount of detailed information as to who we're looking for. See if that works. So once we identified who our target audience is, we went through and developed a branding message. What are some of the things that we want to communicate? And they're really based around the key attributes that Burnsville has. And there's some wonderful things that, as Peggy said, that we really need to talk about that Burnsville have. One of the first and most obvious things is location. I mean, our spot within both 35E and 35W, where we are in terms of south of the river, is a tremendous strategic advantage. Well, how do we take advantage of that, and whom do we promote that to that can take advantage of that? We have a very business-friendly atmosphere. One of the targeted people that we were talking to happened to be Casina. When we were working with them, as we went through the process, it became apparent they really kind of fit the profile. It was privately owned, small business, and so we happened to ask Lonnie Casina, why are you here in Burnsville? He said, well, let me give you an example. The other day, there was the police department was pulling some people over for speeding along the new Burnsville Parkway and pulling them into our parking lot. And I thought, that really is not very conducive to business. And he said, I was able to call the chief of police and have a conversation with him. He said, I understand your issue. We'll take care of that, and we'll do it in a different way. But he said, that's a business-friendly atmosphere. They could have taken a completely different approach. They didn't. They're concerned about the businesses in town. And we sort of use that to develop a profile of Burnsville. What is the average education? All of that really drilled down. And so, quite frankly, we've got 2 or 3 pages of it and drills down into some of the advantages and profile of the city of Burnsville. And we also talked about the role of education and really how important a quality education system is to people's choice, whether to buy a home or to locate a business there. And so we wanted to look at that and a lot of the amenities. One of the things talking about education, when you looked at the 4, one of the charts that we gave you shows the 4 themes, and you see the 2 of them are education. Education is a critical aspect to economic development because it's where we tie all this back together. Is growth in education or improvement in education helps foster this. Our strength here helps with the education side. So we're looking at the overarching piece to be able to tie this back together down the road. So then the $64,000 question is, okay, so what do we do with all this? We've got a target audience, we've got a branding message, we understand what that looks and feels like, so how do we deliver this today's world. In the old days, you'd do press releases and maybe you'd take out some ads and we'd do some other things. But we now live in the world of social media, and people don't necessarily read the papers, and they get their information from a whole host and variety of sources. So we need to be cognizant of that. The other question is, who's going to deliver this information? Again, we talked about, if you recall, our boundaries. We're not creating another entity. Nobody really has ownership of this institution because it isn't an institution. So how do we deliver this? So this is where we try to solve for that equation, as it were. And from our perspective, this is where social media and networking really come together. Phase one of this is to convene a group of the stakeholders that really have a vested interest in the success of Burnsville and the economic vitality of the community. And that really is both the city and the chamber and certainly a number of businesses. And we are working to develop a fairly simple program that you can plug into, a little bit like a plug and play kind of concept, where you can plug into it, where you can launch branding messages. And what I mean by branding messages is we've kind of outlined what the scope of those messages ought to be, and it's really positive messages about what's happening in Burnsville. So whether it's the city talking about something, let's just take fire muster, for example. City might have a thing on Facebook, it might be in the e-newsletter, and it might be on something else. If they talk about something that's going on within the community, well, that message gets picked up by 2 or 3 other groups that are participating, and they send that out. And so what happens is you begin what I call this whole virtual circle. We're using e-newsletters, we're using Facebook, we're using LinkedIn, we're using these other technologies and methods for communicating. And what happens is that it's, you have to bear with me, I come from the East Coast, and we have the old saying, a rising tide raises all boats. And so what I mean by that here is that as we begin to send out positive messages, and let's say I send one out about the real estate market and the Visitors Bureau picks it up and sends it out in their group. Well, now that has gone out to their sphere, and their sphere sends it out to their sphere, so it begins to go exponentially. Well, the same thing happens now if they send out a positive message. I pick that up, and it goes out through our channel of communication, out to our sphere, and then our sphere relays it out. And so if you get, even to start with, a dozen businesses, whether it's the city, the chamber, other businesses, starting to send out these positive branding messages, and each one picks it up and sends it out through their channels, that allows it to sustain itself, because now there's no one person responsible for it. It kind of self-perpetuates, and it continues to grow. And the thing is, it allows us to reach a different target audience than we were able to do before. And so it allows it to drive it out through other people's venues. And we take advantage of those. And it also allows it to grow, because we start small, but as we grow and other businesses plug in, it allows us to continue to add. We have more people having more messages, and we kind of send that out. So that's really the first phase of how we envision to be able to do this. And it's really in an effort to kind of complement the work that you guys do, the work that Skip does, because now we're really bringing a spotlight to Burnsville, and we hopefully get in front of people and kind of get that germ going of, I'm thinking about expanding, or I'm thinking about possibly relocating my business. I keep hearing about Burnsville. I saw it, came across somebody from a friend of mine who's in the real estate side, maybe saw something, and now maybe I saw it because the Visitors Bureau. So you start to see different messages, and you start to think, geez, there's something really going on down in Burnsville. I should at least consider that. One of the other targeted groups, obviously, is the commercial real estate group, because they tend to be a place that people who are thinking about growing go to. So they'd be part of that first phase of people that we would tie into it. So that's kind of where we are today. And as we move forward into these other 2 aspects of it, we're certainly going to look to partner with you guys, because attracting and retaining businesses is sort of where we go to next. And we've got a separate committee that we're working with. And so as we begin to look at that, that probably will be something that we will ask more of you than we are tonight. Tonight was really just to kind of bring you up to date as to where we're going. You've perhaps heard of some of the stuff going on with My Burnsville. We thought it'd be time to kind of share with you and give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have.
Great. Commissioners, questions? Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, so Richard, I'm just curious, actually Peggy, you said this is no longer a 360 Communities project. So could you give us a kind of a bigger picture view of how is 360 involved at all, and what, in what way, and what other organizations are involved with these other pieces, kind of help us fit the pieces together?
360 had done some research and came forward with the concept, but very early on asked for buy-in from a number of different groups within the community. So certainly the chambers of commerce and the business community in different ways. Who else has been involved? The YMCA?
The hospital, the city. So there were a number of initial stakeholders in that first leadership group. And then there was a lot of discussion and a lot of people who participated. In fact, I think, Ken, I remember you being in one of the earlier meetings. And so there were a lot of people that had an opportunity to talk. They provided some staffing and continued to do that for this in the background. But it's really, it would be a misnomer to call it a 360 project at this stage. It's really a community project. And I think it will continue to go. But 360 may continue to provide some staffing. That part is probably still a little bit fuzzy as they've had some changeovers.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Gene? Great, Ari? Well, thank you both.
Thanks for
I
your
think there were a lot of questions that many of us have had recently, and it's very encouraging to have you come here tonight, because we really need to continue with this as we try to economically develop the city. And, thank goodness things are working in the right direction, and you're only going to help all the more. And
Try.
anytime we can help, let us know.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you.
So thank you both, yeah. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the review of the business incentives. Skip is going to present some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, Jenny is too, I'm
Let me
sorry.
get my cheat sheet up here and we'll be ready to go. Mr. Chair and Commissioners, as you probably recall, this has been actually on your agenda. This would be the fourth meeting. Just a quick history lesson. Back in September, we looked at various incentive options, and then at that time you asked us to bring back information about grants and loans. In November, you reviewed that information, asked staff to bring back a draft revolving loan policy. We did that in January. You reviewed that draft loan guarantee policy, and you asked us to give us some parameters, asked us to bring back a new draft, and that is what you have before you tonight. Back in January, the parameters you gave us was you wanted whatever we did to incorporate all businesses except retail. As you recall, the original draft was all focused on STEM. You did, however, say let's continue to at least maintain an emphasis on STEM. You asked us to investigate the possibility of a buy-down of an interest rate, which I'll talk about in just a moment. You correctly identified that we did not define STEM business in the policy and asked for a definition. And then you asked for some banker and business input, which we'll also give you. Just walking through the three different types of programs that have kind of been on our plate. If you look at the revolving loan program, on the positive side, definitely that would be an assist to small companies. It would be something good for companies leasing. And quite frankly, there'd be an interest rate that might actually provide a little bit of funding to the EDA. On the risk side, though, as we've talked about before, we'd be asking staff to basically make a judgment as to whether the business was really creditworthy. Could be viewed possibly as a competition with our existing bankers. And obviously, if somebody defaulted, we'd take a hit on the loan. The interest buy down, we did go out and get some information on that. Positive, obviously, it would lower the cost of the loan to the business. The risk, as we investigated this, that we saw was the buy down. quite frankly, might be needed because the loan itself carries a higher risk. We were instructed by our EDA counsel that the payment of that buy-down could be a little problematic in it and how we'd structure it. And quite frankly, because it is a buy-down, that would mean every single deal would involve us spending money. So it would be a continuous drain on the EDA fund. Both of our consulting firms that we engaged cautioned us against this option and suggested we may want to be looking, at some of the other options. The loan guarantee positives is the bank or the lending institution is going to be doing the review, and they're going to be the ones bringing their expertise to the table. We will only spend funds if the guarantee is called, which means obviously the business has had a problem. The loan guarantee does limit our financial exposure only to the amount of the guarantee that we're putting on the table. Limited cost to the EDA. Obviously, if the guarantee is never called, there is no cost to the EDA. And quite frankly, the bank giving the loan has a much higher risk than the city doing it if it's a revolving loan. Risk, and this was pointed out when we discussed this at your January meeting, would a risky loan be approved because of the guarantee? The more staff has looked at this, we don't think so, because we are consistently being told by our banking institutions in town that their underwriting criteria is extremely strict right now. And the chances that they would actually make a risky loan is probably very nil. As a matter of fact, there are loans that they think they should make that their underwriting criteria will not allow them to make. And then obviously, under the risk, the highest risk we have is if we did a full $20,000 guarantee and that whole guarantee was called. We did get some outside input as you requested. Both our EDA attorney and our financial advisory firm gave us a lot of information. Based on the information they gave us, we believe the loan guarantee is the best policy to bring forward to you, which is what we've done. We talked to 3 of our community bankers. All 3 told us they thought this type of a policy would be useful and could be a deciding factor for them in a close loan. And when I define a close loan, I'm talking about one that in the past would always have been made, really does not carry a tremendous amount of risk, but isn't being made right now because of some very strict underwriting criteria. So we're talking about one of those that's almost across the goal line, and it just needs this little push. We also contacted the Small Business Association director. He also told us that this type of a loan guarantee would be useful for small business in his information. And then in our general conversations with businesses, they have consistently told us that access to capital is a problem for them. And we also noted in your background that it came up at our CEO forum, and they had a whole discussion on that. And without even knowing about this policy and this discussion, they were talking about if somebody could do some little guarantee, it might help out a little bit. The loan guarantee that you have before you tonight, the objectives: attract new business, expand existing business, help with improvements or renovations, help with acquisition, and some emphasis on our STEM companies. We did define STEM in the policy as you requested. It's basically defined as a business that's engaged in healthcare technology or a scientific field, or half of the employees have a post-secondary degree in that field. And the one caveat that's in the policy is that the EDA will make the decision whether you are qualified as a STEM business, and their decision is a final decision. It's really not up for discussion.
So, excuse me, so we're gonna pass on that at every time?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I don't understand the question.
If, you're talking about our group here to pass on each loan. You said the EDA,
EDA will approve it.
that's us.
No, you're the Economic Development Commission. The
Okay,
EDA
I'm sorry,
is
you're right.
our 5 council people acting in their role as the Economic Development Authority. So they would have the final say
Okay,
as to whether or not this qualifies as a STEM business.
my apology.
We would obviously bring any of those before this body for a recommendation.
Skip, correct me if I'm wrong. The EDA is set forth by state law to administer economic development money. that's in a,
It is one of the bodies
it's, okay,
that can do that, yes.
okay.
The parameters of the draft policy before you, the loan guarantee, is that the EDA would guarantee up to 50% of a loan not to exceed $20,000. So if the loan that the business is looking for is a $100,000 loan, the most the EDA would guarantee is $20,000 of that. So at any time, the EDA would never be on the hook for more than $20,000 of that loan. We would do this over a 5-year period of time. We would request documentation that this guarantee is necessary and is sufficient to make sure that the loan takes place. And then there would be a small application fee that would be non-refundable, basically just to kind of cover the paperwork and, quite frankly, to prevent tire kicking, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Criteria that we've put in the policy for you is if you're a new business coming to Burnsville and you're seeking this guarantee, we want you to be bringing 10 employees. If you're a new STEM business coming to town, we'll make that 5. A little bit of special emphasis on the STEM. If you're one of our existing businesses and you need to do something to expand, we're going to be asking that you be adding 5 employees. If you're an existing STEM business, that would be 3. If you're an existing business looking for renovation help, some improvement in your building, an equipment purchase, again, we'd be looking 5 employees for a standard business, 3 if you're a STEM. Documentation of the need, and as we've, in all of our policies, retail would not be eligible for the loan guarantee. I thought, just as a little reminder, is I went back to our 2008 business survey and just give you a little demographics on our business base in Burnsville. 14% of our businesses are home-based. In that survey, 4% were planning to expand, 2% were planning to renovate, 73% of the businesses have 9 employees or less, 54% have 5 employees or less, 86% of the businesses in Burnsville had been here 6 years or longer, and 74% expected to stay another 6 years or longer. Just thought the little demographics might just give you a little picture
Very
of
good.
who our typical business is. In the policy, what we've put forth is the eligible cost would be, obviously, if you're moving to a new Burnsville location, if you're needing to do a build-out, if you're needing to do an expansion, if you're looking to renovate or improve your building, or if you're looking to do an equipment purchase. Couple of questions we thought might help guide your discussion is, are the employee requirements reasonable? Should we have lower requirements for the STEM businesses? Or I guess the opposite, should we have higher requirements for the STEM businesses? And then obviously any other questions or guidance you could give us. I would stand for questions, Mr. Commissioner, and staff would recommend that, the EDC recommend that EDA adopt and approve this loan guarantee policy.
Discussion. Ari?
Yeah. Have we discussed this with banks to find out if this guarantee offer would put the bank over the line on a quote risky loan for a new business? You know, would 50% or $20,000, regardless of the loan amount, actually, if the bank was not in a position to make the loan because the business was small or unstable, whatever, is this, it's obviously not a full guarantee, is this enough of a guarantee that would likely push the needle?
With the 3 community bankers that we talked to, Commissioner Silke, they told us this would be something that would be looked on positively and could help them make the loan. As I understand it from my discussions with them, those loans that are kind of right in that gray area, there's a nervousness on their part to make them because the regulators are taking very serious and close looks at those. Being able to say that the city is guaranteeing a portion of that loan, the way it was explained to me, would help them say, okay, this one's close, I can make it. When the regulator comes in and says, well, why did, you're supposed to score 80 points and it scored 79, why did you make it? Well, the city's guaranteeing $12,000 of it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, yes.
Gotcha.
Now, it's going to really depend on each individual loan, how that gets applied. But in the general perspective, when we were discussing this, it seems like it could be a help.
Gotcha. Okay.
Very good.
Question. Go ahead.
Gene?
Couple of questions, Skip. Do we want to put in registered business with the state for X amount of years before they go there, or we go with the loan? If I can't get the loan this year, how soon can I reapply? And perhaps we should define, or maybe that's the wrong thing to do, define retail business. And I guess the last one I would comment on is, I want the loan, so I hire 5 people. How long do they have to be with me?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think those are all good comments. If the commission wants, we can certainly add, it has to be a registered business with the state. The other 3, I guess I would ask for the commissioners' input. If for some reason the bank turns them down, when can they reapply? We'll take your input, or I would assume whenever the bank lets them reapply. Define retail.
Wait, time out.
Yes.
Maybe they change banks. Maybe they go to another community.
If the commission
that's
has a
the-
suggestion as to when they should reapply, I think definitely we should.
Well, that's the other thing. Are we going to make this only applicable to Burnsville banks?
Again, we're looking for your input.
I would suggest not, I think.
Okay,
It
well, I'm
would
just,
limit our
yeah.
options.
Yeah,
Huh?
that would do.
It
Limit the
limits the
pool,
options,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think just as a suggestion, if a business doesn't get the loan and they want to reapply, certainly telling them come back in a year, to me seems reasonable. What do you all think? Or is that making them wait too long?
I mean, if they didn't get the loan, it's because, it wasn't because of us, it was because of the bank, so it's.
And you typically apply to several
Multiple
banks
loan- yeah,
anyway,
banks,
so
yeah.
one,
Yeah.
sure, you get turned down by one,
Yeah.
you don't quit.
Yeah, you keep moving,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, especially now.
So they could, in theory, keep coming back to us, and really until they ran out of banks or until they got the loan.
Well, is it a separate application for each bank, or?
Well, in theory, commissioners, they would come to us with a letter from a bank that says, if the city does this guarantee, we will do the loan. This guarantee will be the necessary step to get us to do the loan. So how many banks they go to before that, I'm not exactly sure how we track that.
Doesn't seem
It's
relevant.
irrelevant.
Doesn't relevant, yeah. So we're the last step, not the first step, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So Skip, the way you've described that process, then, once they come to us, their loan is in pocket, so to speak, as long as we give them the go-ahead. So my question would be, besides the criteria we've discussed here, from number of employees and so forth, is there anything else we look at on as to whether or not we would approve or not approve?
I don't know, Commissioner, that's what we're here before you for.
Okay.
Well, so the staff has no further recommendations other than what is laid out here?
Correct.
Okay, Craig?
You talk about a close loan, somebody that would be eligible for this guarantee. At some point in the future, that may need to change. What is strict underwriting procedures today will certainly be different 2 years from now, a year from now, next month. How do we adjust with that, or doesn't that matter? Doesn't it matter if we adjust?
I don't know that at this point I can totally answer that question, Commissioner Reavers. Kind of going back to the previous discussion, we are the last step. So the bank has to be saying that this is the only thing it needs to put it over the line. So theoretically, if the underwriting criteria lessen a little bit, we're somewhat holding the bank's feet to the fire to say, you got to be making good loans.
Right.
Can the financial institutions get to the point where they're not necessarily making good loans? Of course they can. It's happened in the past. Yes, at some point, we would probably have to stop and say, we have a concern here. Where that point is, I can't tell you.
Okay. Gene?
Yep,
Then you-
question. At what point do I put my initiation fee down? In other words, I'm looking for some money, and the bankers will probably tell them, well, the city of Burnsville's got something that you could talk to them. At that point, I register or apply with the city of Burnsville, and they say yay or nay. And I've laid out some money. Now I go to the bank, and they say no. Oh, no, they won't say no. You've already got that
It's
taken
the other
care
way around.
That's the other way around, yeah.
of.
The other way around. Yeah, they're coming to us after the bank has said, if this happens, we'll do it.
Jenny?
Commissioners, a lot of this process, if you look at the application form that's in your packet, on the back page, they need to supply us with the lender information, and of course, this would come to you, along with some supplemental information, including 2 years of income statements and balance sheets, so there will be more of a review than just filling out your name and address in a letter from the bank. The pro forma, the business plan, if they're new or they're expanding, what they're doing, bids for the proposed use. So if they're buying equipment, we want to see what this will be used for. And then that documentation from the letter, that it's necessary and sufficient to fund the loan. So there will be
Yeah,
just a
that's-
little bit more to that, and this does describe the process. We are the last stop, as Commissioner Silky said, not the first.
Who Skip who actually provides the money? The EDA? And then if so, does the EDA take a position on the loan?
Yes. The EDA is the funding source of the guarantee. So in the EDA's accounting, they are going to set aside whatever that guarantee is and each guarantee thereafter.
If it's equipment, does the EDA take some sort, does the EDA hold the mortgage on the equipment? Do they hold any?
Lean on it, can we lean on it?
Yeah, this is secondary to the bank, so the bank has first position, and then this is a guarantee in second position, so most likely not. Our expectation going into this is that it's the risk. The risk is that in order to help necessitate these loans that we think are doable and maybe not as risky given today's credit market, but are necessary to help some businesses locate and expand here. That is the risk that we take, Commissioner Reavers. We're just assuming the worst.
Mr. Chair?
Kevin?
So to clarify the process, they'll come to us with all their information in hand from the bank. All they need is the high sign from the EDA. As Jenny points out, they've got all this information on the application. The EDA then reviews that information.
You would first.
You would.
The EDC would review it first, then the EDA. So then as Skip pointed out, then this commission should have some discussion of what standards or criteria against which to judge this information. Does that make sense? Okay. Is that something we're able to do tonight?
What?
Put together some sort of criteria or list of figure out how do we judge?
Jenny's got it.
Mr.
I don't think we should do that until we can smell some hair burning.
Mr.
Jenny?
Chair, Commissioners, in the policy, we have kind of addressed those criteria.
Okay.
So if they are a STEM business and they can commit to doing 3 jobs for, that was a good point, for 3 years or number of employees, equated number of years, whatever, then it meets the intent, it meets the policy. They are considered on a case-by-case basis, but I think we've already laid out what those criteria would be. We still have the last say. EDC and EDA can certainly deny that if we don't have the money. If it's been too risky and we've taken some hits, we can stop the program at any time. If we're not comfortable with it, there's some flexibility in there. But I believe the way this is written, this is our criteria, just like what we do with the TIF project or tax abatement. The policy is there that lays out the criteria. If they meet that, they make application. Of course, they know it's subject to final approval by the EDA.
Right, and actually, Jenny, I think that's helpful. My question was regarding, would this commission have any standards to evaluate the financial information?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. How closely would we look at that, or are we essentially saying, look, the bank has approved this, and therefore we're okay with it?
That's what I would lean towards, because they're in the business of lending a bigger volume of money, number one. Number two is, I don't think that we're competent enough to do that if it were not for the bank being around.
I'm certain I don't want to take on that
I
responsibility.
don't either.
Commissioners, if I can, that's how we got to this point, as staff was talking about reviewing and approving revolving loans and whatnot. Skip and I aren't expert underwriters and
No.
lenders, and how do we judge these applications? And so this became, let's use those people who are already doing that and somehow incorporate that into our process. So
Right.
kind of a win-win of a project.
I have one other question, Skip.
Mr.
Little
Chair.
different lines. How many other communities are doing anything like this?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, off the top of my head, I can't answer that question.
Okay, okay. Because I haven't heard of any, and I haven't really been looking either too much, but
Commissioners, as far as I know, in Dakota County, in our market cities, none that we know of. When we started this, we talked about the tools that were out there and what our neighbors have, and we all
Right.
basically have the same tools. There may be a couple of the larger cities, maybe Minneapolis or St. Paul. They've got different tools, a lot of different kind of small lender programs that may have something like this. But as far as our kind of market area goes, we're out there out front with this program.
I guess I would like to still speak to how long do I have to have that employee working for me? And if I only have them a week, how does the city get the money back, or what kind of penalties we
Yeah.
got? Or,
But you know, I can remember getting some financial help from the city, TIF money, and to the best of my knowledge, no one ever checked to see if we fulfilled the number of employees.
that's what I've heard in the past on other things.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Okay, maybe
I
that's
cannot
changed.
speak for when you received TIF. I can only say that our TIF contracts now do require that the recipients document that they have hired whatever amount of employees is in the contract.
There we go.
Mr. Gurzini is correct, though, that there is nothing in the contract, nor is there anything in state law that requires that you continue to employ those people. And I think the reason it exists in state law is, especially in a TIF contract, you could be looking at an elongated payout time, because we operate all of our contracts on a pay-go basis. We could be making payments for 10 years. We have an economic downturn. Through no fault of its own, the company has to lay some people off. It may not be the best thing to do to the company to come back to them and say, oh, and by the way, that money we had given you over the last 3 years, give it all back.
Right, right.
So I think that's why the law exists where it is. We actually require that the companies report to us for 5 years after they have hit their threshold for when the TIF starts. So they get a letter from each year saying, you need to report where you stand in relationship to these aspects of your contract. And for most of our contracts, they're numbers of employees.
And if I don't send you that letter, if I don't send the letter back to you?
That's considered a action of default, at which point the EDA does have the right to terminate your contract and make no further payments to you. I can say in the 6 years I've been here,
That's
I've
an
never had anybody
That's an
not.
ongoing thing, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've never had anybody not send the letter back and say, this is where I stand.
We don't have that with this program.
So, Mr. Chair, to Commissioner Grazini's point, then, sounds like we should talk about, are we expecting the companies to continue at that same staffing level as long as we provide the guarantee, and perhaps have some sort of reporting, or is it just not an expectation of the program?
Comments? Jenny?
My comment is the maximum guarantee period is 5 years. So, once they commit to this, I don't know what our remedy would be.
Yeah.
Think about that. Let's say
How
we
would
say
you
it's
unwind
5
it?
years. How do we undo what we've already given them? That might be a challenge. But certainly we could have it in there and with the expectation, so that they certainly are aware we do have this expectation, and just deal with that if that should ever happen. Maybe like 3 years, because it's more than half of the time that they commit, and then of course they can submit the reporting to us just like we do on the TIF contracts. That hasn't been an issue.
But
Throw that out there.
Go ahead, Ari.
the 5 employees might not be reasonable anyway. If you said 73% of businesses in Burnsville are 9 employees or less,
That's correct.
you're asking them to do a 50% increase in overall headcount for a loan value of $20,000. The math doesn't seem to work for me there. And then if I've got to keep those 5 people for 3 years, I don't know, there's something I'd want to sign up for.
Greg?
And who, I guess, who initially is gonna determine, somebody makes application and says, yeah, I'm gonna hire 10 employees. It might really be 3, but 10 is a good number because that gets them the guarantee. Who is gonna monitor that part of the thing? The bank's not going to, because that's not their
part of it, yeah.
concern.
Yeah.
So how do we kind of ensure that they are, we've got a lot of different categories here. How do we ensure they're in the right number of employees?
Mr. Commissioner, we can certainly add into the policy that there be a reporting requirement. We'll also get some counsel from our financial advisory firm. We may be in a position where if the bank makes the loan based on us being willing to give this guarantee, if then 2 years later we pull the guarantee, we may have jeopardized the whole loan.
Sure.
So we'll get some consultation from our financial advisory firm, and if you're okay with that, we'll if it's something we can put in there, we'll certainly put
The reason I've been commenting so much, I've talked to a few, about 3 people that have done this type of thing with TIF, and basically got their dollars, and they tried to do everything up to the TIF thing, but they didn't make it. Part of it because of the economy the last 3 or 4 years. And they said they were never policed, all 3 of them.
Commissioner Grazzini, I can only speak for the city of Burnsville, because that's the only place in which I've been employed that has TIF, and in the 6.5 years that I've been here, every single TIF contract that has had to report their employees has reported their employees. And unfortunately, one of the first things I had to do with one of our businesses when I got here was sit down and tell them, you have not met your employee number. And we actually did go back and amend their contract and adjust their payment and everything else based on the amount of employees, because they said we overestimated how many employees we would hire. I can only speak from my experience.
Mine is all hearsay, so.
Well, but by the same token, you got input, you
Yeah.
came here, you brought it up, and I think we have confidence in that the city of Burnsville is doing it right. So, Ari?
Suggestion on the employees, should we make it a percentage of their current headcount versus a fixed number? For example, should it be 20% increase in employee headcount versus 5 people?
For
be-
expansion.
For expansion, yeah, exactly. So in a 10-person company, it's 2 people, et cetera, if it did 20%, for example, versus a set number, because 5 people on a 100-person company is nothing, 5% on a 10-person company is too much.
I don't think 100
Maybe that doesn't apply here, yeah.
would
Be here, no.
be
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And I think I'd be a little more concerned about getting the right, an actual representation of the number of jobs going into the guarantee, more so than I would be after 2 years, whether they kept those jobs. We guaranteed the loan, our obligation then is, or our concern then is don't have to use the guarantee money to pay the loan, versus they went from 10 to 8 employees and trying to worry about that, I don't think is, figure out if it really is 10 or if it's really half of that, what really is the number of jobs they're adding. But a percentage or something based on something other than a number might be a good idea.
Commissioners, I believe what I'm hearing is that for existing businesses, we look at, instead of a finite number of 5 and 3, we look at plugging in some kind of a percentage.
I think so. That would you
Good
all
idea,
agree?
good idea, Chris.
But, yeah.
Are we still comfortable requiring a new business moving to town looking for this guarantee to have either 10 or 5?
It would seem high based on
on
the
those stats,
statistics you gave us, that
yeah.
80-some% is 9 or less, so
Yeah.
that rules out a lot of companies, it would seem like, so maybe 7 or 8 is more like the number instead of 10, or.
Again, would you like a finite number there, or would you like a percent increase, possibly a little bit larger percent increase for a new business versus an existing?
Well, a new business wouldn't have an increase.
It'd be new.
Needs to be.
So
Good point, thank you.
Well,
so that one needs to be a number.
Number, yeah.
so I have a question. Skip, if you think about the new businesses, we've we've gained over the last several years, do they tend to mirror our current population of businesses, the demographics, or are they smaller, larger?
Lion's share would be right in our demographics.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there a reason for point number one? Was there a reason we wanted to keep it at a certain size versus not having a floor for business size?
I think the reason, Commissioner, for a new business was basically establishing that if we're going to help you and you're moving here, it would be a business of
Some size.
some size,
Okay.
as opposed to a one or two person business.
Okay.
But again, we're seeking
Yeah.
your input on these.
So,
Why don't we leave the 5
Yeah, 5 maybe.
and 10 persons for a business that's moving to Burnsville?
Mr. Chair, a quick question, and apologies if this has already been spoken about and I missed it, but Skip, you talked about how because this is a guarantee, the EDA, every time a guarantee is made, the EDA would take those funds and set them aside, so they would no longer be available for further guarantees. So do we have some idea of how much absolute dollars would be available over, a period of time?
That is something that the EDA is going to have to establish. I think our initial request is going to be somewhere around 100,000,
Okay,
so potentially 5 maximum guarantees.
5, and so if we look at 10 employees minimum, so we could be adding roughly 50 employees to the
Possibly.
city.
Mhm.
Okay.
Possibly.
So if we lower it too much, then we risk not getting enough return
Sure.
on those dollars.
Right.
And maybe you answered this already. Did we look at other city? I asked another city. It came up in conversation, oddly enough, and I didn't get a whole lot of information. But Brooklyn Park does the exact same thing with a loan guarantee. And I said, have you gotten? I don't know what word I used, but they have not had to pay on any yet.
You know how
As long as I don't, I apologize. I should have got a lot more information. It had just come up at our last meeting. I thought I got to ask because the other person brought it up. And they said they haven't lost any money or haven't had to fulfill a guarantee yet. But the same kind of program, I didn't ask about STEM or any of the other requirements, but there are obviously other cities out there doing it, so.
But, Skip, would you have access to that information?
We can certainly call Brooklyn Park.
Yeah. That would be good to know.
Yeah, somebody else's experience and what they
Yeah.
do with these numbers or how they,
Yeah.
I don't know what their criteria is at all.
Mr. Chair, so question as far as the numbers for new businesses, if we find at some point in the future, we're just not getting any applications for this, and we could always change that number, correct?
I would think so.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We can recommend to change it.
Or if in the first month we get applications for all the money,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know.
Very good point.
At this point, do we make a recommendation or do we await more input?
If you're comfortable making a recommendation with staff
Yep.
doing a couple of those little things you've asked for, then yes, a recommendation would be appropriate.
Would
So
anyone
moved.
care to make a motion?
So moved.
Gene makes the motion. Anyone second it?
Sure. I'll
All
second
right.
it. Yep.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend to the EDA and the city council that this business growth loan guarantee program be passed or
Move forward.
with additional information coming from the staff before it gets to them. Make sense? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Good. Great job.
Thank you, commissioners.
Next on the agenda, Skip, you're on tap again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. This, I believe, is the first land sale that's come before you since this body's been established. The EDA possesses a parcel at Cliff and River Ridge. It's the parcel outlined in pink for you on this plat. This is Cliff Fen Park over here. This is a conservatory area over here. This is basically the industrial buildings along Cliff Road. And then this is the wooded hill that goes up to where the IDS 181 admin building is right now. About right here is the Able Training Center for the firefighters. We have gone through quite a long process that was outlined in your background to get this parcel ready for sale. The parcel is 4.6 acres. It was appraised last month. It has an appraisal value of $950,000 in a developable state. The county currently has it valued at $26,000 because of its condition right now. The applicant has had an estimate made to do soils correction and some work to get building pads ready. That estimate is basically $1.3 million. The city a couple of years ago got an estimate for a retaining wall. There'll be a retaining wall on the backside of the property that will need to be built similar to a retaining wall that exists on the industrial building next to that. That estimate was just a little bit under $500,000. So once the applicant buys the parcel and gets it ready, the amount of money put into that process will exceed its current appraised value at its developable state, plus the $25,000 that they will pay us. Hence, this will not be a business subsidy for selling it at this price. The offer we have is basically a two-phase build-out. Phase one would be a build-to-suit retail professional service building. They're estimating that'll be about a 3,000 to 4,000 square foot building. Phase two would be a multi-tenant commercial building. They are estimating that they'll probably do about a 20,000 square foot multi-tenant building. And as I mentioned, their offer price is $25,000. Our contract that we are in the process of working through with them will have commencement and completion dates on these two phases, and that contract would, if recommended here, would go on to the EDA. Staff would recommend that the EDC make a recommendation to the EDA to sell the property at the proposed price and under the proposed phased building process to the applicant, and staff would certainly stand for any questions that you have.
Questions, comments? Anyone?
Why not 50 grand?
I'm sorry?
Why not 50 grand?
If that's a recommendation from the EDC, we can certainly take it. At this point in time,
I'm not a real.
we won't. We probably won't be selling it to them.
Well, is there some dollars to come up on?
Again,
Is there a possibility of getting more for it? You see it.
no. We have had other offers on this land. This is the best we've ever had.
Then take it and run.
Agree.
Mr. Chair,
I think we have to have a motion in order to do that.
I have a quick question, if
go
if
ahead.
you don't mind. Skip, you mentioned timeframes would be in the contract. Are those anything you can speak to right now?
Commissioner Sturts, we are looking at phase one commencing about 2 years after closing. And let me take a step back. They are proposing that they'll start all the remediation process and within 30 days of closing. That obviously takes time. And then commencement of phase one will be 2 years after that, with a completion of 1 year after that. Commencement of phase two would be approximately 3 years from closing, with a commencement date or a completion date of 1 year after that.
So 4 years.
4 to 5 years, assuming nothing goes wrong. We have two nice buildings out there, and obviously they're paying taxes, which the property is not generating right now.
Okay, thank you.
And there's no, the purchaser or intended purchaser could not come back and ask for soils correction, TIF money, or anything like that? Okay,
No.
good. So that's
No.
out of the question. Okay. Okay. Do we have any motion?
Motion.
All right.
Yep.
I would second.
Kevin seconds it. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No one. Okay, good. Okay, Skip, more updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did provide some of this in your background for you. We did give you the activity report for the first 2 months of the year as it relates to efforts on the STEM Alliance. We'd certainly answer any questions you have about that activity report. It's been a good first 2 months this year. Couple things just so you're aware of them. MnDOT will be undergoing a resurfacing of Highway 13 this summer that will start at 35W and proceed east to the county border. And they will do it in phases. 13 will never be closed. No business will lose complete access. If a business has multiple accesses to 13, they may lose one access at a time, but no business will lose multiple accesses. MnDOT will be providing press releases that we will obviously also put out. They will also provide a website in which you can check progress of the resurfacing, and that website will also have a process in which, if a business wanted to, they could sign up for weekly emails on that progress. We will promote all of that to the business community.
Great.
We are anticipating this process will start about the beginning of May. The business survey, all subcommittee met with us. We met with Decision Resources. They have either just started the survey or will be starting the survey shortly, and they will do a residential survey also. Probably sometime this summer, we'll be able to bring the results of both surveys to everyone.
Okay.
And then the BECREC subcommittee also met to discuss their yearly event for the Twin Cities brokers. They have elected to do the Canterbury Night once again, and we are looking at June 14th as that night. The brokers will all be invited for a night out at Canterbury. They'll get coupons to get them in and get them some food and a betting chip and all of that. The Chamber is working with us. Chamber is actually kind of managing the event for us. It's a good event. It's a good way to thank the brokers. It's a good way to spend some time with them. Obviously, all of you will be invited as we get closer to that event. And I certainly would answer any questions on any of those.
Any questions for Skip? Hearing
you,
none?
Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Manhouse. Any other matters to bring before the commission? Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, may I point out for the commission and our esteemed guests that today is actually Pi Day. PI, the Pi 3.14. Just
It is.
in case you didn't realize that. I just learned about this today.
Thank you. Thank you for filling us in.
So are you buying pie?
Commissioner Sturts, you will find this amusing, but my son, who majored in economics, actually does supply pie to his fellow employees at his office every year on Pi Day.
March
And
14th.
he gets the same strange looks as you did from your commission.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
Rightfully so.
Thank you all very much.
You need a motion and a second
Oh.
when you're adjourned.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Ari,
Second, yep.
good. In favor?
Aye.
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 Skip,
Opposed?
one quick question after the meeting's over. Highway 13 businesses have known for a long time this is coming, the resurfacing.
It has been in the paper quite a bit. I would think that they know it, and as we get closer, there'll be an even stronger push.
How far does that
Letters
go?
or anything?
How far is the,
35W all the way to the end of the Dakota County border,
which is where?
Hastings.
That's a long ways.
goes that far, huh?
Yeah.
Cedar
No,
Avenue?
no, no.
I'm picturing the bridge out by.
Oh, yeah, it goes through West St. Paul and
Yeah,
everything.
out by
yeah.
West, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's gonna be expensive.
Oh, the Dakota County, I was thinking
That's a long
Burnsville.
ways,
Oh,
yeah.
No. Dakota. I'm sorry.
He
Dakota.
said
You're right,
Dakota
yeah,
County.
yeah, you did, yeah. I was thinking Burnsville.
Glad they're paying
County,
for it.
not the city, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna
For that.
be a big project.
Yeah.
You got enough,
thank you
you got
all.
enough phone lines?
Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, well done, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Commissioners.
Thanks for all your.
You're
Jenny.
getting to be
Guys.
an expert.
Huh?
You're getting